Hi, it's Tina, tourism trainer, facilitator, clarity coach, founder of the Tourism Space. Welcome to the Tourism and Megatrends blog series. In this series, we're having a look around us and into the future at what's coming down the line in terms of tourism and having a look at what that might mean for you as a tourism operator or a tourism business, all with a view to building businesses and destinations that last. Today, our topic is demographics and population. Now, that's a huge topic. Demographics is the study of population effectively, and it looks at things from a statistical perspective, things like age, income, family size, marital status, things like that. It can go on for a long time. There's lots of different statistics and they're measured over time, and they're really important for predicting for governments and policymakers the plans they should be making for the future. Today I'm going to focus on just one demographic, which is age. And I'm also going to narrow it down to just what that means for you as tourism businesses communicating with different age groups. Now, you might be surprised to hear me say I'm going to look at age because it's a little bit old school really now to be looking at that. We've really moved on to the idea of delivering experiences that match motivational needs and that those emotional needs, and that those emotional needs could span all generations and all age groups. So we've started to look at delivering experiences from things other than demographics. But I'm going to go back to age because I think there are still some things that we can learn by looking at segmenting our visitors purely by age. So the first one we'll look at is seniors. Now, what can we say about the seniors? The first thing we can say about the seniors is they don't really regard themselves as seniors. They see themselves as people who've reached a stage in their lifestyles who are not old, but are living in a different way that they might have done when they were in the full of their working lives. Many of them are still working. Many have high incomes. They either through their continued working in the labour force or through good pensions or investments during their lifetimes. They are the wealthiest generation so far to date because many have made money through property and through inheritance that previous generations had not made. They're also healthier and active and want to continue to be healthy and active. They look for things that allow them to express that health and to maintain that health. So it's really important for them. They look for opportunities to learn and opportunities to expand their horizons. They're no longer interested in material possessions. They more or less own what they want, and now they're looking for enrichment through experience. They're happy to travel. They're high domestic travellers, less so internationally, but more and more travelling internationally. We know that the demographic for seniors is that about 25% of the world's population in another 10 years will be in this category, and it's actually a bit of a challenge for the world because right across the world in all economies the senior demographic is growing. This means that the reliance on pensions and on subsidy from the other parts of the population is going to grow. So there is a theory that the travel propensity of seniors may reduce over time as we move into generations that are not as financially well off as this particular one. They also have time on their hands, so they like to invest time in looking at learning about different cultures, about travelling, and about planning above all things. So what do you do about that in your marketing? Well, here's a few tips, practical tips and advice that you can look at. You adopt an ageless marketing approach. As I said, seniors do not see themselves as seniors. When you use images of people that might be 10 to 15 years younger than your demographic. So while they have moved on in age in terms of their capacity to live their lives and their mental outlook on life, they have remained pretty much in the Generation X type zone that we would see right now. Talk about attitude, not age. The only time that you mention age or the word senior is in relation to a discount, in which case they are all happy to be seniors. But aside from that, any reference to age will work against you. It will also exclude other parts of the population who might be interested in your particular product. So it's about their attitude, it's about the zest for life that they have, the willingness to explore and the ability to explore that they're quite proud of. Show single seniors. A lot of seniors may have lost their partner, may be divorced at an older age, or may just have a partner who's unable or unwilling to travel. So speaking to the pain points of a single traveller is really quite important. They don't begrudge the single supplement, but they are acutely aware of perhaps being in situations where they might be on their own, the only single at the table, the inability to talk to others. So if you can, in a subtle way, address those pain points in advance, it will help you with this demographic. They focus on value for money. So while I mentioned that they do have a higher disposable income than most generations, they are not price insensitive, but price is less of an influencer than value. And value is about the quality they receive in return for their money. They are prepared to spend, so offering value is really quite important. They're also very well researched because they have time on their hands, and they also, as a demographic, really enjoy the research part of their holiday. That's part of the satisfaction they get, and they're very much doing that online across multiple platforms. So they'll have researched enough to have a good idea of what value is and what they can perceive as value in your destination. And promise face-to-face. So while they're very active digitally and online, they still really value face-to-face connection, and they need to be assured in advance that that's something that they will experience if they're going to spend time with you and in your destination. So they're an interesting demographic. Lots of time, lots of money, and willing to travel. It's certainly worth knowing how to speak to them correctly. Let's move on to Generation Y. Generation Y are what's commonly known as the millennials. So the generation that would now be in their late 20s onto their late 30s. They've been kind of a little bit maligned and afflicted. And what do we know about this particular demographic? We do know that they've grown up in a world that's very complex, that's full of chaos, and that has been very uncertain for them. They're challenged economically more than previous generations have been. They have a huge demand for kind of global enlightenment, and also for their own ability to make an impact in the world. They're quite individual. They're also very visually driven. They spend a lot of time comparing images online, particularly in regard to their holidays, sharing images, sharing the visual part of their lives. They have grown up surrounded by both traditional media and digital media, so they're still of a generation that has a mix of both and lives both online and offline, or at least distinguishes between those two things. They have a distrust of mass media, governments, and the establishment in general. And there's some of the key features of them. They travel young, they travel often, and they really do want to explore. We're just at the stage where they're moving into later life stages of maybe getting married and having children, and the impacts that that might have on their travel propensity is as yet unknown, but is likely, because they've travelled young and often, that that's going to continue into the future. So ways to speak to this generation. Strong imagery. Like I said, imagery is really, really important. They're the generation of the selfie, that invented the selfie and that are sharing that everywhere. It's highly important that you provide quality imagery, and also provide the opportunity for them to create quality imagery while on their trip with you. A new word, Instagrammability, is particularly important for this generation. You will hear things like, if I can't put it on Instagram, it might as well not have happened. We know that in surveys, close to 50% of this demographic can say that they would make a holiday choice based on Instagram alone, and the curation of their Instagram account is one of their highest priorities. So things like perhaps having an Instagram guide to your destination may not seem all that outrageous, providing places where they can create excellent photos. Also the idea of the bucket list, what in your destination or about your experience is one-off, only happening here and only at this time, because that elevates the status of their holiday experience amongst their peers. And also surveys for this generation show that posting for a large number and quite often is motivated by elevating their experience, and in a way making their peers a little bit jealous of the uniqueness of what they've just experienced. Branded hashtags relates completely to their online sharing habits, and precisely to what I spoke to about connecting with others who are experiencing the same level of experience that they are. User and influencer generated content is really important to them. They trust this. Like I mentioned, they distrust mass media, they distrust marketing that's very obvious and ostentatious, but they really do appreciate each other's comments and each other's reviews, and their peers, what their peers say has high value for them in their holiday decisions. Equally, the influencer is important to this generation. Those that they choose to connect with in the celebrity or in the online world are very important to them, and their endorsements dramatically affect their decision making. So knowing the key influencers for your particular Generation Y market can be quite important. And finally, make it easy. This is the generation, again, of information overload, and also that has the first generation really noticed the concentration span dropping in terms of their research. So while the seniors can research extensively and like to drill down into it, Generation Y really need this to be easy. So itineraries that tell them what they can do, having quick responsive customer service, and the ability to get the supports they need online at the time they need it is really quite important. And again, the Instagram list really does make it easy for them to make their decisions. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of Generation Y, and on to Gen Z or iGen, so the generation that's just emerging now, and that as yet we're really kind of only guessing how they'll really manifest themselves in the world and in travel. But there is a certain amount that we do know. So this is the generation that would be around the 10-year-old mark now, moving up to their early 20s. So really just emerging as adults at the top end, but even as a teenage demographic have a very, very high spending power, and one of the largest generations since the baby boomers. So that really is significant. They're also known as the screenagers and the click and go generation for very obvious reasons. And that's one of the big things about this generation. They're digital natives, which is the term used for them. They've grown up entirely in a digital world. They don't distinguish between online and offline. It's all just life, and most of it is integrated between their online and offline, but the term offline is not something that exists. And we spoke about that in the digitalization blog as well. What else do we know about them? They too have grown up in a world of chaos and of uncertainty and of damage to the world, and they have a very strong perception that they're in a world that has been damaged by previous generations, and that those generations are largely still alive and still doing damage. They've kind of cast themselves as heroes in this scenario, that they will have a belief that their generation can address this and fix it. There'll be a generation, my mic just fell, there'll be a generation that don't run away from the problems but face them up. So they're motivated as well by their individual self-fulfillment, but very focused on the common good and the influence they can make. They are also living in a diverse society. So kind of my generation has come through thinking through inclusivity and diversity and welcoming that. They've come into a world where that's just the way it is. They're used to diversity, they like that, they expect that to continue. They haven't had to think about some of those societal things that we've had to think about, and therefore they're free to think much more so about the common good and the sharing. Family dynamics have changed massively in the time that this generation has come around. So some studies estimate that the traditional family setup of 2 parents and 2 children is less than, or not necessarily 2, but parents, children and a family unit in a traditional sense is less than 50% of families right now. So it's totally normal for this generation to have single parent families, multi-parent families, blended families, all kinds of mix of families, and they won't question that. For them, family though is still really important. It's no less important than for any other generation, and in some cases more so. They really value family, and one of the things that stands out is their relationship with their parents and potentially their grandparents. They may be the first young generation that really values the parent relationship at the early stages of their lives and right throughout their family lives. They trust their parents, they respect their authority as they're growing up, and they see them as amongst their closest relationships throughout their lives. So that's interesting about them as well. And how can you speak to this generation in particular? The other thing about them is they adapt really, really well to change. They really like change, they're used to it. They adapt their spending habits quickly. They spend money quickly. At the moment, it's their parents' money that they're spending quickly, and they've had the ability to do that. And so their perception of money will probably be, it won't have the same status that it might have had for other generations. So what do we know about them? Instant digital. So while we saw that Generation Y, the millennials, do need you to react quickly, these guys need you to react instantly. So they're living in an on-demand world, in a live stream world, in an instant world. They won't wait 10 minutes for you to get back to them on an email. They will expect instant interaction via text and via social platforms. So if for any reason you thought, for any reason at all, that digital was optional in your business, this generation is obliterating that. You need to be on multiple platforms, speaking to them through text, stream and social media. Real-time information, that relates exactly to what I said. They need it, and they need it now, and they need quality information. They're visual over verbal. So the imagery trend we spoke about with the millennials is really manifesting it here with this particular generation. They're higher educated than any previous generation. Their visual literacy is really high, but their verbal literacy is lower than in previous generations. To an extent, they're inventing their own language, which is characterized by emoticons, stickers, and international abbreviations that transcend languages. So you will need to adapt your language to their language. Linguistic scholars would say they are going to radically change international language, and that it will move beyond text to the type of visual communication that this generation are pioneering. Leverage their generational influence. Like I said, their relationships with their families are important, and the other generations of their families are quite close. Again, they see themselves as heroes in this, as navigators of this new world for their parents and their grandparents' generations, and as such they have a lot of influence over the spending powers, well, not so much the spending powers, but the spending habits and where the other generations in their families spend their money. So you can leverage them for that. And values are important to them. The common good is an important value, as I mentioned, but you do need to tell them why they should care about you, what your values are, and why they should care about it, and how that might align with their values as well. So they're an interesting generation to watch out for. And that's my very quick whistle-stop tour of just 3 of the age demographics. And I think you can see when you do go back to the traditional segmentation variables that there is quite a lot in it. Even though they have huge similarities across all those generations, they're all going to want personalisation. They're all going to want a digital support platform and digital navigability. They all want great gastronomy. They all want local. They all want authenticity, and they all want sustainable. So that's back to what's in common across them. But as you can see, in terms of how you communicate, their age is going to have a really important influence on your decision making. So that's it for this week's vlog. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you'll join me again next week. And in the meantime, here's to your lasting success.